wrote a very successful book called The Billionaire's Vinegar, which was about the wine frauds that were committed in the 90s and early 2000s, and are probably still going on today with people like Rudy Kay and people like that that were literally taking bottles like my empties that are in there, counterfeiting the labels and producing wines that people would never drink because they were so collectible. And he went to jail, but
Wait, who went to jail?
Yeah, no, Ben didn't go.
Rudy went to jail.
Rudy Kay went to jail.
That was in the details.
Ben exposed
How's the food in jail, Ben?
the whole counterfeit industry.
Tell us about Bubba.
How's the wine?
So Ben exposed the entire counterfeit wine industry, black marketing that was going on, that people really didn't believe was going on, but proved that was. So this book is about sort of like the same thing. It's people that are doing things legally or illegally. Bitcoin's got a lot of shady things, and so I'm not an expert at all in Bitcoin, so this was very interesting.
Well, before I wrote the wine book, The Billionaire's Vinegar, I also wrote an article about Zippy
Oh, right,
for
that's
Philadelphia
right.
Magazine
Philadelphia
and about his
Magazine,
cellar
that's right.
business. Yeah.
You wrote for Philly Magazine for a long time.
I wrote for Philly Magazine. I'm sure I interviewed you for it. I also
That's-
took Bob's class.
Yep,
Yeah.
and he's also a friend of Letty Tiz. So-
Oh yeah, exactly. Actually, she lives in my town, Montclair.
Right.
She came to my book launch event
I
in
know
Montclair.
her very well.
So I thought I would just sort of describe a little bit about how I came to write this book, basically, because it's a good way of saying what the book is. And I mean, I'll just start with the title, even though you have it in your laps, because the title is very explanatory as well. It's called The Mysterious Mr. Nakamoto, a 15-year quest to unmask the secret genius behind crypto. So in 2011, so 3 years after the wine book came out, I was a general interest magazine writer. I wrote about wine, but I also had written about a ton of other stuff. And so it wasn't like a given that I would then write another book about wine. I was back to magazine work, and Wired magazine assigned me to write a story about Bitcoin. And Bitcoin had launched in early 2009, and this was summer of 2011, so it was still a very fringe, kind of experimental thing. And I was an English major in college. Like, I was not a technical person. I did not know how to code. I was not particularly into computer science. I was a very late adopter. Like in the 90s, when people would talk about what a big deal the internet was, I was like, yeah, it's just like an invention. Like, it's just another invention. It's like a toaster. Like, why is everyone so excited about this internet thing? And so I was, I was in no way like prescient about Bitcoin and where it would go, but I just happened to get this assignment. And right away I was very interested in the topic, because it was like, at the time, Silk Road, this dark web black marketplace, was just beginning to make the news, and Bitcoin was the coin of the realm on Silk Road, and it sounded just so fascinating. It was this underground money. It was not, banks and governments couldn't control it. It was, it had solved something called the double spending problem, which was that up until that point, like as soon as the internet started taking off, people thought like, all right, we're using the internet for music, we're using the internet now to buy books, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, we need internet money, we need digital commerce, but there was this thing called the double spending problem, which is, what is the internet? It's a Xerox machine. Like, it copies everything instantaneously and distributes it everywhere, and that's a problem if you're trying to create money, because you obviously, want to limit your money supply. You don't want your money to be counterfeitable, and so what was to stop someone who created digital money if it was just like a string of, bits, like from copy pasting it over and over again and double spending the same piece of money? So Satoshi Nakamoto, this previously unheard of pseudonymous person or group, solved the problem using some arcane computer science that we don't need to get into, but he basically figured out a way to prevent double spending and for the first time create digital scarcity for money. And conceptually, it was like there had never been a money like this that was not issued by a bank or government, that was not controlled by a bank or government, that was not, the supply of which was not controlled by a bank or government, counterfeiting of which was not enforced by the government. And the way that Nakamoto did this was, normally you think of a bank as a database of debits and credits. This person has X amount of money in their account. They just send it to that person. Okay, we debit this account, $5, and we credit that account $5, and we have this record, this database, and we control it. We're the bank. We have, we're backed by, let's say, for consumer banks like FDIC. So that's why people can be sure that their money's still there. Bitcoin was controlled not by a bank, not by a government, by a crowd of people who volunteered their computers to the network, to the peer-to-peer network. And basically through, again, the arcane computer science that Satoshi Nakamoto came up with, the network of computers in the Bitcoin network were able to kind of come to consensus or agree on what the current version of that database was. And so it's completely decentralized. It was very appealing to libertarians because libertarians like things that are decentralized, that don't have someone in control, that don't require government involvement. So I was interested, I was interested in kind of the technical innovation. I was interested in the conceptual innovation. I was interested in kind of the culture around it because it was this underground rogue money that kind of had a romantic allure to it. And then I was also really interested because no one knew who Satoshi Nakamoto was. And people were just beginning to realize that no one knew who Satoshi Nakamoto was. Because at first he was just some guy who showed up on an email list in 2008 with like his idea for Bitcoin. And this was an email list of cryptographers who were used to people using, either people they'd never heard of, who just were smart people, because there was lots of smart people you'd never heard of, or people who used aliases because it was a group of cryptographers and it was the internet, and they were kind of a secretive group. So people assumed it was just some guy named Satoshi Nakamoto or someone using that alias. And only over the next 2 years, as Nakamoto kind of interacted with a community of, an open source community of programmers to develop, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin software and kind of get it off the ground, did people gradually realize, okay, this isn't his real name and we actually have no idea who this is. And when people would ask any questions aimed at learning something, just a little bit about it, he would always kind of deflect or just ignore those questions and really stayed focused on the technical stuff. So in April of 2011, he sent like some emails to some of the fellow software developers working on it, and then that was it. He was never heard from again. So he disappears so no one knows who he is. He suddenly disappears without warning in April 2011. And over the next few years, through some computer scientists, by kind of studying the early blockchain, this database, as this database is called, that's controlled by the crowd, they were able to determine that the earliest blocks had all been mined by by the same person or computer or group of computers, and it was so early that it could only have been Nakamoto, and that basically this one person, Nakamoto or group, had mined 1.1 million bitcoins. And the total money supply of Bitcoin is 21 million bitcoins, which it's still being issued by the network. Every 10 minutes, like a new block is created, which is a bundling of the latest transactions. And the miner who, there's sort of a race among computers to be the one to solve to solve a puzzle to kind of be rewarded for that block, and so that they get a Bitcoin reward, and that's how the system issues new Bitcoin. But it issues it at the steady cadence.
Why is it 21 million?
Well, that's a excellent question. So the 21 million will only be hit in 2142, is what people estimate. But having said that, like most of the Bitcoin has already been issued. Like it's like an asymptote. Like it's it's going to be less and less and less Bitcoin reward. He never explained 21 million. And there have been various theories. Like there's I think in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the number 42 is there's some like totemic meaning to the number 42, so people think maybe it's related to that because it's half of 42, but no one really knows actually. But the capped money supply again is another thing that really appealed to libertarians who hate like governments printing money and leading to hyperinflation, et cetera, et cetera. So now you have unknown person or group disappeared for unknown reasons. No one really knows why they created Bitcoin, and they control like 5% of the money supply, and they haven't touched the coins also. So when I was assigned to do the story, the mystery of who it was very intriguing to me, and I thought I was a reporter, and usually in reporting you just like call enough people, and then someone knows something, or someone knows someone, and they know something, and eventually you kind of can get closer and closer to the center of the story and the truth. And that just did not happen with this story. Like, it was weird. It didn't seem to have a center, and no one seemed to know anything. And the best you could do was there were a handful of people who, prior to Bitcoin, had come up with their own ideas for how digital money might work on the internet. And so early on, when people began to look into who was Satoshi Nakamoto, they focused on this group there were about 4 of them, and they became like the usual suspects. Like, one of them must be Satoshi, but they're just not admitting it. And they all denied it. And so when I did the story, I was like, oh, this is going to be, this will be fun. I'll solve the mystery, and that'll be a good story. And I did not solve the mystery, and the closest I came was in the story. I named the 4 people who people thought were like the most likely candidates. And this became like a kind of the great white whale, especially for tech journalists, of like, who's Satoshi Nakamoto? And so a series of articles came out over the years, and like, usually though, to justify themselves, they had to name a person, because you can't. Everyone already has said we couldn't figure it out. So you want a new article, you better advance the story. Who's the person? So like the New Yorker named, I think a Finnish guy who was not Satoshi Nakamoto. Like every few years, someone would name a new Satoshi Nakamoto, and in 2014, sort of notoriously, Newsweek published a cover story that was like the face behind Bitcoin, and it purported to name like Satoshi Nakamoto, and they, unlike all the other, sorry,
No picture.
well, no, there was a picture. But unlike all the other dumb journalists, the genius reporter at Newsweek had realized that while everyone else thought Satoshi Nakamoto, was a pseudonym, like Satoshi Nakamoto could actually just be someone named Satoshi Nakamoto. So they comb through naturalization records, and they find a guy named Dorian Prentice Satoshi Nakamoto, who lives in a suburb of Los Angeles with his mother, completely broke, like had to turn off his internet service because he has no money, and was unemployed. Had worked in. He was an engineer and had worked. Had done some classified work, but as have over 2 million people in America, and so Newsweek names him, has quotes from his estranged family saying, yeah, he's a weird guy, very damning evidence.
Yeah.
And
He was very strange, but he could work the computer.
There's 12 people like that in this room.
exactly.
Yeah, we don't live in my mother's basement.
Well, but we're all weird.
Yes.
And has a picture of his house. Also, there's like his house address is visible in the picture, like his car license plate's visible in the picture. So there's just like a media mob descends on this guy, and like literally like an encampment on his lawn, a la like the OJ trial. And then he comes out of his house, and there's an AP reporter who, for some reason, he agrees to get in his car because he says he'll buy him lunch. So Dorian Nakamoto gets into Ryan Nakashima's car, his Prius, and so he says, what do you want for lunch? He's like, sushi. Fine, they start driving to go get sushi. There proceeds like a OJ style car chase with all the other reporters like following in cars and like live tweeting hashtag Bitcoin chase, hashtag Satoshi, So like across the freeways of Los Angeles. And again, needless to say, this guy's not Satoshi Nakamoto. He had nothing to do with it. Didn't really know what Bitcoin was. He kept mispronouncing it like Bitcom. Satoshi Nakamoto was like very fluent, clearly native speaker of English. Dorian Nakamoto, who had been born in Japan, was not a native speaker, and it was very clear he wasn't capable of generating the communications that Satoshi Nakamoto had. Fine, okay, so that was one of the bigger debacles. But then 2015 arrives, and every couple of years, because I had written this early Wired story on it, I and anybody else who'd written about Bitcoin early would receive like unsolicited emails. from someone being like, I'm Satoshi, or, you know, I'm pretty sure the guy in the next office is Satoshi, or what, that kind of thing. So,
I'm not him, but I know who is.
so like late 2015, I get one of these emails, and it's basically purports to be like the hacked files from the computer of an Australian computer scientist named Craig Wright, saying like Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto, and the email purported to be from like a disgruntled employee who wanted to out him as Satoshi, and yeah, there were a bunch of attachments, but the subject header said like not virus scanned, you know, like their computer generates that if there's like so I was like, this is malware. So I just archived it and did not open the attachments. Wired magazine also received this. Gizmodo, which was like the tech version of Gawker, received it. And they come out with like big bombshell articles a month later about like Satoshi found. Satoshi is Australian computer scientist Craig Wright. Within 24 hours, like their articles are completely debunked because, you know, people found evidence of Craig Wright like inserting references to Bitcoin like after the fact into blog posts from like before Bitcoin. He had claimed to have like 3 PhDs on his LinkedIn profile, and he had like 1 maybe. I was glad I dodged that bullet and did not pursue that, you know, that email that I got. But every few years, again, more, you know, someone come up with a candidate, it would get debunked. 2021, late 2021, I get another one of these emails, and this one's like, I have evidence that Elon Musk is Satoshi Nakamoto.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, wow, that'd be, you know, it's quite a story. That'd be a, you know,
Big story.
that'd be a big story.
Did you doge a bullet?
Sorry.
Oh, Jesus. I said, did you doge a bullet? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
exactly.
Ouch.
So,
Yeah, really.
flash, spoiler alert, Elon Musk is not Satoshi Nakamoto. And just to like nip in the bud, if anyone has any lingering doubt that Elon Musk might be Satoshi, like imagine that Elon Musk would not claim to be Satoshi
Right.
if he is Satoshi.
Right.
I mean, no, right?
No.
So I mean, Elon Musk hired somebody to get a better video game score for him because he just wanted to impress people. So I think if he was Satoshi, he would take credit for it. So that kind of got me really refocused on the story. And the cover says, right, a 15-year quest to unmask the secret genius behind crypto. So I was investigating in 2011, and I kind of was keeping tabs on it through up till 2022. But full time, I was on it then from 2022 to, let's say, late 2024. So the 15 years is including the more passive. You know, I was not like, I had to work. I mean, I had to make money. So I was not like nonstop investigating this for 15 years. So, you know, the Elon Musk thing happens, I kind of look into it. And I just began to think at that point, just the stories of all the failed attempts to unmask him are becoming like a bit of a story. Like, why can't anyone solve this? And at that point also, it's really becoming, it's no longer just like a weird parlor game mystery. Like, this is becoming a pretty mainstream technology, and it's very strange. It's like the biggest mystery of technology in the 21st century, and it's just strange that no one's been able to solve this. Like, why not? And so the combination of Bitcoin's kind of going mainstream, I also thought that, and this was sort of similar to what I thought with the billionaire's vinegar, that crypto was like a kind of a difficult topic to get your head around, but and part it's not totally accessible, and like most of the books that existed at the time for wine were like more kind of technical, like a history of weather patterns in the Côte d'Or, or like Wine for Dummies, sort of instructional. But I always liked nonfiction books that just told a story and you learned about the topic in the course of reading a good story. And so I thought, like, wine, kind of, if I could, you know, find a story like that for wine, that'd be good. And that's how I wrote The Billionaire's Vinegar. And I started to feel the same way about crypto. Like, crypto's really hard to understand. And I thought if I could pair it with a story that's just a great story, that's sort of book worthy. And so, at that point, I, you know, pitched a book to a publisher and got a contract and quit my job and spent the next, you know, 2 years working on this. And The book basically just follows my investigation, and it ended up being much more first person than I had intended. And I was kind of halfway through my work on it, and really struggling to find like the narrative through line. And I had dinner with a fellow or ex-journalist friend, and he was one who's like, he gave me a couple suggestions of books to read that he thought like, this could kind of follow my investigation through it, and that ended up being essentially what I did. And so it's a combination of the story of my investigation, the story of crypto, the story of all the other attempts to unmask Satoshi Nakamoto, and the story of Craig Wright, the fake Satoshi Nakamoto, who had like a very kind of serpentine path after that initial outing. Like initially he claimed that he'd been sort of outed against his will, but then everyone started calling him a fraud, and he started suing everybody who called him a fraud. And there was a bunch of litigation. There was a trial in Norway that I spent 10 days at, where he was suing someone for calling him fake Toshi. And so the whole like Craig Wright thread is another piece of the narrative.
Well, it's kind of like the billionaire's vinegar in that the fellow who was involved with that also struck out at people and threatened to sue, and did sue, and that too. I mean, there's a similar theme there.
There's like several, I think, accidentally there are a few parallels with Billionaire's Vinegar, and one of them is that there is like a con man who's sort of one of the main characters.
Right.
Another, though, is that there was, in the Billionaire's Vinegar, the Christie's auctioneer Michael Broadbent had vouched for these bottles, and so and I always thought like he was just kind of a little over enthusiastic as a salesman, and maybe convinced himself they were real and didn't do the diligence. Not that he was sort of and there was someone similar to that in the Craig Wright story, someone who was like a pretty upstanding person who had a really good reputation, and who kind of got suckered by Craig Wright and ended up vouching for him, and it really damaged his reputation, as Michael Broadbent's was somewhat damaged by his association with Hardy Rose.
There were a bunch of people that got involved in
That were,
that knew what was going on.
or certainly suspected. I mean, you never know, but they suspected. Yeah.
So I purposely did not read the book. I did know that the founder of Bitcoin was elusive or whatever, and I kind of did a little research, not on the book, but just on the research, and I was like, it kind of seems a little bit like Banksy, but I said, we know for a fact that there are people that know Banksy. In your research, do you feel that there are people in that periphery that know who this guy is, or no? Is it still
excellent
elusive?
question. Yeah, no, okay. So for a couple things. First of all, not only are there people who know who Banksy is, but there actually have been some like investigative articles, if you search for it, like where people probably have reported who Banksy is, but they've denied it, and no one's ever got. But there was even an academic paper where the authors used like geolocation data from I guess like either Banksy's social media posts or like dates when like Banksy, when a new Banksy painting would appear, and the places and the times, and then they correlated it with, I guess, social media post data from the person they suspected was Banksy. And so it seems pretty convincing that person is Banksy. I don't remember their name, but you could find it online. So actually that secret probably has been, revealed. But so to your question, I got it. That was what was different. Like, I didn't have the feeling that there were people who definitely did know. And at first, though, that wasn't obvious, because there are people who will tell you they are really certain that they do know who it is. And they'll say, oh, it's this guy. But then, and at first I bought it because there were people who would know, be much more in a position to know than I would, because they were computer scientists, or they were cryptographers, or they were like in that world, or they were in the libertarian kind of alt money space or something like that. And it turned out that those people just had strong hunches, and they may very well have been wrong, and they didn't actually know. They would claim more certainty than they actually was justified. And there was one guy who, in the course of my investigation, at one point I came to believe he was Satoshi Nakamoto, and he was also the one person from the sort of the early group of digital money cryptographer libertarians in the 90s who were all talking about digital money long before Bitcoin came along. And he was the one person of all of them who had actually written somewhere in a very obscure place, I know who Satoshi Nakamoto was and what their political and social goals were. And I'm still not sure that he does know that, because he's a blowhard, and like the place where he made the comment was in like a comment on someone's comment on his quasi-anonymous blog where he spews just like noxious opinions into the world. And so I think he was kind of showing off to his, and I actually, well, not only do I think that, I mean, I ended up like knocking on his door one day, and it was a long journey to find him and meet him, and I asked him, and I was like, do you really know, or do you just think you know? And he kind of hemmed and hawed, and like, well, I know. Like he didn't even know. Like they don't know. No one knows. No one knows.
And do you think it's a single individual at this point,
That's a great
considering how many, like you just can't find out? Do you think it's a group of people? But I mean, that's got to be awful secretive that nobody would talk.
I get into this question quite a lot in the book. So, and I entertain the different possibilities. So, I always get this quote wrong, but it was quoted to me by a bunch of people, and it was like the Benjamin Franklin quote, you know, 2 people can keep the secret if one of them is dead, I think is that right? Or is it 3 people? 2 people. Okay, I think I kept like, while I was working on it, I'd be like, yeah, 3 people can keep the secret, and they'd be like, no, it's 2 people. Anyway, so I subscribe to that. I mean, I agree, like it's very difficult to keep secrets, right? I mean, all it takes is like a relationship goes south and suddenly, you know, like one of those people just wants to screw the other person over, and or like there's a divorce, or there's a business breakup, or there's some lawsuit. I mean, it comes out, or someone just blabs, you know? And so that was one reason I came to doubt that it was a group. An exception to that would be if it was a group at like the NSA, right? Because there you have groups that keep secrets every day, right? And it's not, I do not rule out that it could have been either a group at an intelligence agency or a individual associated with an intelligence agency. But having said that, one of the things that I did in the investigation is I partnered with some academics who in France who do what's called stylometry. Like they basically do computer statistical analysis of texts. And the reason they do it is because they're literature professors, and they're trying to assign authorship to like old plays by Moliere, like that kind of thing. But they have also adapted it to use, like they figured out the exact 2 guys behind Q, and when one took over from the other in the writing. And so one thing they became confident of is that all of the Satoshi Nakamoto writings, at least in all of the emails and the forum posts that he made, were all by a single person. They do think it's possible that the white paper, which was the more kind of academically stylized document that Satoshi Nakamoto first announced Bitcoin in 2008, might be a different author, like that's in a quite different style. But all of the communications were by, they think, one voice. Yeah, exactly.
And
It's the same.
Shakespeare's birthday today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
So, with what we're going to learn when we read this about Bitcoin, about cryptocurrency. It's a little personal, but do you own any Bitcoin? I don't understand it, so I don't buy anything I don't understand, which is why it went up.
There
If
wasn't.
I bought it, it would have gone down.
Which is why you and I are still poor.
Yeah, exactly, right. I'm
There
reverse
wasn't.
alpha. No, all kidding aside, like with what
Yeah.
you've learned,
Yeah.
do you think it's something that's a valid investment for a normal, everyday guy or gal to buy fractional pieces of Bitcoins?
Right. Okay, so just my quick history with this. So in 2011, like I'm assigned this story, and Bitcoin's like really hard to get your head around, right? It's just this very abstract thing. Like, what is it? Like, what gives it value? So I thought, like, I at least need to buy some Bitcoin to understand, like, how do you get Bitcoin? Like, what do you do with it? Like, what does it look like? Where does it go? Like, what is Bitcoin? Like, it's so, and so I there was going to be a conference in New York City, the first like Bitcoin conference, and they were charging 5 Bitcoins for entry. And so, and at the time Bitcoin was like $17 a coin. So, $85. So I bought $200 worth of Bitcoin at $17 a coin. So it was like 12 coins. And it was very cumbersome to buy back then. I mean, now you can put your credit card on Coinbase, buy Bitcoin. Back then it was like, I had to wire money to a money transmitter in Iowa, and it took like 3 or 4 days to clear. Then I had to send that money from the money transmitter to an exchange in San Francisco called Trade Hill, exchange it for Bitcoin. Then I had them send me the 5 Bitcoin that I needed to send to the conference person, and I sent the other 7 to Mt. Gox, which was famously the largest exchange, the one that was reliable, because the various exchanges at that point had been hacked online, and I was like, okay, I'm going to play it safe and park my coins in Mt. Gox. Flash forward 2014, Mt. Gox implodes in a fireball of hacks and bankruptcy and scandal, and there go my Bitcoins. So, 7 Bitcoins, today would be worth like, I don't know, what is Bitcoin today? Maybe $630,000, Okay, but 630, and I think Bitcoin's like 90,000 today, around there.
98 closed it today.
Close at 90?
Somewhere.
Yeah, around there. So like 7 coins, $630,000. So, but, like at the time that Mt. Gox imploded, I had a sell order in to sell my Bitcoins. Because at that point, Bitcoin had already gone over $1,000, but then it had gone back down, and it was now in the 400s range. And I thought it was like, this is going to zero. Like I want to get out, and it will still be a great investment. I paid $17 per coin. I'm getting it out for like $4.50, and so go me. Anyway, I put the sell order in, and then like before it processes, they implode. So I didn't get my money, and then I also was lazy and sort of pessimistic about the likelihood of a bankruptcy outcome happening that would be positive, and so I didn't. I just kind of ignored the various filing deadlines to be a creditor, and so actually now it turns out that people are getting a decent amount, if not 100% of their money back, and I will get none of that. But you only get back what it was worth at the time of the implosion. So it's not like I'm out 630,000. Maybe I'm out, whatever, a couple $1,000 or less. So that was that investment in Bitcoin. I did not, and that kind of soured me on the whole thing for a while. Then when I got back into focusing on this in 2021, I did buy some cryptos at different points. Like I bought some Bitcoin. I bought and sold. Like I bought some Ether. I bought some Solana. I also bought one called Luna that like went to zero and I lost a bunch of money on. I made some money and I lost some money, but my biggest takeaway was that investing in crypto requires like a lot of attention, and it's like it's not that fun to be constantly anxious about your investment, because crypto is so volatile that unless you really want to pay attention to it all the time, and like especially if you're in some of the less established currencies, like which are really volatile and really could go to zero.
So you're saying it's better to be in the stock market today, right?
Exactly. It's better to be in a unassailable asset like the U.S. dollar or the global reserve currency, right?
Perfect asset.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Tesla.
but to the question of like, is it worth something? I mean, Bitcoin in particular has never become the useful money that I think Satoshi Nakamoto envisioned. And his initial paper called it electronic money, peer-to-peer electronic money. And the idea was you would use it for things, and it never really has become useful for that because it's extremely slow. It's like 7 transactions per second compared with like tens of thousands for the credit card companies. And but it really has, just by more and more people buying into it and deciding that it's valuable, it is valuable. It is now $90,000 a coin, and so it has become kind of a digital gold store of value, and that's real. I mean, it's also pretty volatile, but it still does have like a kind of digital gold roll.
I took a week course in Zug, Switzerland, with classmates to learn about crypto, and this sort of gets to your question as to like learning about blockchain and crypto. How do we wrap our hands around it? The CEO of Bitcoin Switzerland gave like the most compelling 30-minute talk that simplified it and distilled it in a way where like I kind of get it, but I still don't get it. So the analogy he gave was that from the dawn of humanity, there have been transactions, and early on we would barter wheat, grass, whatever the token was, and then it turned to gold, and then the ease of transactions and the ability to transact money more easily led to prosperity, which then led to money, and then credit cards. And the presumption was that the easier that you make these transactions, the more that the world will prosper. And so in the white paper, and all the folks that are crypto hawks make it seem like if this becomes the sort of denomination of choice, like the world will prosper in a way that like we'll never have done before. But the thing I'm curious about is like, we've got 21 million of these. Now we're mining to the point where we can't mine anymore, right? It's getting halved every 7 years, is it?
Where it becomes sort of a tougher and tougher, economic proposition for how to like make it worthwhile to mine Bitcoin. Yeah,
So it becomes so densely concentrated that I'm still, as beautiful as the lecture was, I'm still seeing how like it really hasn't worked out to what the original goal is.
Yeah.
So people
Yeah, I mean,
investigate.
doing it in my head, the number is big. 1.2 million, is that what you said?
The number of coins he has?
No,
21 million coins
21
total.
million.
Yeah.
If I multiply that, do the math easier by $100,000, it's a lot of money, but it's still not that much money. It's like 1.2 trillion.
Each Bitcoin
Right
has
now, it's like
something.
I think it's around 2 trillion, the total Bitcoin market cap of even of already extant
you
coins.
took a Bitcoin or crypto overall?
Bitcoin.
Okay.
Bitcoin, $2 trillion. Gold is like, I think 22 trillion or something. But it's not inconceivable that, I mean, given crypto's trajectory so far, you can imagine like a world 5-10 years down the road where it's worth like 2 or 3 or 4 times that, and suddenly, I mean, you could imagine a world in which it does replace, exceed
No,
gold
I
in
mean, I
value.
remember when it was down to $1,000, I thought about buying it, and
Yeah.
it dropped to 700 a couple days later. It's like, oh, I'm staying away from this.
Right.
What do you make out of the fact that the supposed Satoshi or whoever, they haven't spent a single coin? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
How do you wrap your head around that?
Exactly. So one of the theories is one of the theories is that is the greatest argument that Satoshi must be dead. That Satoshi never touched the coins. And some of the people who are kind of leading candidates to be Satoshi, like at least 2 of them are dead.
Or he's borrowing against them.
Well, then he would have to show
He would have to
show
expose
ownership of it to the bank or
Right.
to the lender,
And
but
the-
Satoshi would never reveal himself to a person
Right,
or a
but
bank.
the bank would have to have confidentiality rules that they have to maintain.
Yeah, but like, J.K. Rowling's lawyer's like wife told her best friend that J.K. Rowling was the real person behind Robert Galbraith's novels, and like secrets don't hold, even in like Swiss bank secret. Like this secret is too big. That all it takes is some
Yeah.
like intern who blabs.
We know where the
It's like
address
for
is
decades,
here.
We didn't know who was the person around Watergate. And then-
Deep Throat, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
On his
He
death
said
day.
he'd never come forward.
Right, but I'll tell you something that, like, I actually spend a couple pages in the book on Deep Throat because it's sort of an analogous situation, and it turns out that actually like a bunch of people knew who Deep Throat was.
Yeah.
And first Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein knew who Deep Throat was,
Right.
but Bob Woodward told his future wife before they married who Deep Throat was because it was like an important part of his past. Carl Bernstein, I don't know if he told her, but Nora Ephron, his wife, seemed to know because their son Jacob told a friend at summer camp that Deep Throat is Mark Felt, who was a deputy director at the FBI, and the Hartford Courant ran a newspaper article like, camp friend of like Carl Bernstein's son says Deep Throat is Mark Felt. Mark Felt turned out to be Deep Throat. And there were like, also it turned out Mark Felt had to reveal it during grand jury testimony. Mark Felt had told a girlfriend about it. Like within the Washington Post, there were a bunch of people who knew. So even this thing we thought of as like nobody knows, like people knew,
So if Hitler was really in Argentina, we would have known.
Sorry?
If Hitler was really in Argentina, we would have known.
That's what I'm saying.
Mossad would have found him.
It would have come
No,
out.
I think-
Yeah, at some
I
point
think
someone would have,
you're
yeah, you
right.
can't sit on
Mossad
a secret that good.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, Hitler was in the Pampas. Like, yeah, no, you would tell somebody.
You're going to open that bottle of wine?
Yeah.
Let me tell you something.
Not about this kind of guy.
It's transparent. So there was only one gunman that's shot.
Working on the book, I thought I was pretty sure who it was, and it was someone who'd been named before, but I just thought I was going to be able to like nail it down and just like really confirm that this was the person. And then like reasonably early in my research, I was like, I actually don't think it's that guy. So then it's like but when I was like 18 months, I thought like, okay, I just need to sort of like document why I think it's this guy, and then but so maybe if I had not thought I knew who it was, maybe I would have asked for more time or been like, can we keep this open-ended? Although I feel like they probably would have insisted on some kind of deadline that maybe would be subject to renegotiation. I don't know. I think I had hubris also. I thought like, okay, I'll solve it in 18 months. But partly because I thought I knew who it was, but also because one of the things that I planned to do from the beginning was like take a few different approaches that had been previously taken. So I thought like they were going to yield some, unearth some things that had not been unearthed before. And I knew I'd be able to do those things in the set time frame.
Mm.